All right. Welcome, everyone, to this fireside chat hosted by Robust Intelligence. We're here with Hyrum and Ram, distinguished machine learning researchers, to discuss their new book, Not with a Bug, but with a Sticker, Attacks on Machine Learning Systems and What to Do About Them. And they're going to cover the most significant risks to currently deployed artificial intelligence systems, cybersecurity threats, which can undermine AI systems in industry, government, and the military. Before we begin, a few brief housekeeping items. So this webinar will be recorded and we will send the recording afterward. During the webinar, attendee mics will be muted. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box accessible at the bottom of your screen. Hyrum and Ram will answer questions at the end. And at the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a brief survey. We'd appreciate the feedback from you so we can make our future sessions even better. And now I will hand it off to Hyrum and Ram.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here, and I'm so delighted to be able to moderate this session for a book with my dear friend and colleague Ram, Shankar, Siva, Kumar. We're actually going to start with a little quiz after we just want to set context for things to get you engaged. So first, we released a book. This is a book that's intended for a general audience, but has been very deeply researched by interviews from academic researchers and policymakers and business leaders and national security experts. I will during the question part of our interview, I'm gonna give a chance for Ram to introduce himself and I'll introduce myself. But I want to start with a brief quiz by turning it over to Ram.
Yeah, and this is, I want to just echo Hyrum's wonderful invitation. Hyrum is a dear colleague. I just want you to think through, you can kind of like see the poll in front of you. Don't overthink what you're going to see. Okay, what number do you see in this slide? Again, don't overthink this. Next slide, if you ask, like, what kind of animal is this? Is this like a bird? Are you kind of sure about this? And would you kind of eat this? So, hopefully you said it's a 5, it's a number, it's a bird, and you wouldn't eat this, because if you said so, I'm pretty sure that you're 100% human, because that is not how state-of-the-art machine learning systems perceive them to be. In the next slide, you'll kind of see that this is the number 5 is actually not number 3, but essentially it is, that's how very specific kind of noise called adversarial noise has been added to this image. And this is what the book is about on a very broad stroke, about confusing machine learning systems, how attackers can use these methods to kind of perceive these systems to be not what it seems to humans, but what it is very different for machine learning systems. So this is called adversarial machine learning. This has existed for the last, since all the way back to 2002, but really had a big moment in 2016. There's like a hockey stick growth. And the book kind of teases out the stories and the science behind adversarial machine learning research. Now you might think like, okay, how easy is it to do these sort of attacks? I'm going to let Hyrum walk through some of the odds of compromising these systems.
Thanks, Ram. So how difficult is this? And let's compare this to some other well-known paradigms in security and things that you use every day. So let's first take the odds of compromising a modern day communication system. How hard is it for a hacker, for example, to break into your WhatsApp communications? Well, that number would be 1 in 1 with so many zeros after it, which we're told by our publisher is a duodecillion. So the odds of being able to hack into sort of secure communications is extremely slim. In fact, in the book, it's compared to all the air in the room being collapsed to a single point in the corner, leaving you to suffocate. That's the odds of that happening randomly. How about the odds of compromising a modern day operating system like Windows or Mac OS or Linux? Well, that a hacker can succeed at about a rate of 1 in 400 million times to penetrate the core operating system. So still less secure than modern communications, but still extremely secure. When it comes to AI systems that you and I use every day, that you're probably wearing one on your wrist, or you drove one to work, or you used one at home to populate your grocery list, the odds of being able to compromise those systems using this adversarial machine learning that Ram talked about is actually 1 in 2, meaning that it's an attacker who's dedicated to this task can readily compromise these systems. So this is the premise of the book, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so that we can have a conversation about the topic and about the book. But before I do, Ram, I would love to, you and I have known each other a long time. We worked together a long time. You have among the most interesting titles in all of AI and security. You're a data cowboy. So my first question, is this real?
Oh, Hyrum. Yeah, it's very much real. It's printed on my business cards. They let me use this pretty gratuitously. When I joined Microsoft in 2012, right out of grad school, there was ML engineer was not even a career choice in Microsoft at this point. So my manager and I were talking about, hey, what do I kind of be? And he's like, hey, you can be whatever you want. And it's like, wait, are you real? Like, I can be whatever you want. So I love Toy Story and I love Woody from Toy Story. So it's like, okay, I want to be a data cowboy. And it's kind of really weird how that amorphous title has kind of like stuck now for like almost 10 years.
That's amazing. Briefly, you know, I'm going to let Ram introduce himself, but Ram is among our most welcoming and inclusive industries in AI and security. A wonderful partner to have in this journey, which Ram led every step of the way. Ram is leads security research and AI red teaming at Microsoft, where I got to know him. Ram, I'm going to let you give more context and color about your introduction before I move to our next question.
Oh, Hyrum, I actually think my introduction is very deeply entwined with your introduction. You know, like Hyrum said, I've been working with Hyrum, I think, Hyrum, I want to say since 2015, when we started writing articles for O'Reilly about trends in data science. I think in 2016, we wrote an article about how adversarial machine learning may become a thing. And then Hyrum and I had this wonderful opportunity to work together. Hyrum actually led the very first red team exercise at Microsoft for a machine learning system, kind of very high stakes machine learning systems was red teamed by Hyrum for the first time. And since then, like, it's opened a lot of doors at Microsoft and actually through Hyrum's collaborating with Hyrum, but frankly for the industry, for thinking very in a principled fashion about securing machine learning systems. So that's what I kind of do, and that's a very common basis that both Hyrum and I share, is how to empower engineers to develop and deploy machine learning systems securely.
And Ram, as you said, we've been I think in this space for a while, and I think our first O'Reilly report, at my suggestion, my prediction was that, you know, the next year would be the one where we saw an adversarial attack in the wild, and the truth is we didn't, right? Or we didn't, at least in the way we expected. So my first question to you, Ram, is given, like, we wrote this book and we've been in this before ChatGPT was a thing and people just get risk. How have you seen the progression and the seriousness of AI security and AI risk over the last few years?
Yeah, Hiram, I think it's an excellent observation. And you're very right that, it goes back to the book Super Forecasters. Um, it's about how the people, the worst people that it can have to forecast the future are the experts in their field. And I think it stands the test of time. And we wrote it. We were like, next year it's going to be a big thing. And it wasn't. 2017 was not the year for adversarial machine learning. I think um, the way I would, ameliorate some of that, failure is we were looking at it perhaps from a very different viewpoint. We were thinking about like how academic research really did have a hockey stick growth on adversarial machine learning. I think what, and I'm gonna like be very generous and also include you in this. What you and I did not anticipate was how it's a complex topic for organizations. So organizations, like 25 out of 28 organizations did not even know in our survey, like machine learning systems can be attacked. So what is very black and white for academic researchers on adversarial machine learning was not for organizations. So trying to bring, it's almost like the organizations are catching up now. And this year has been a banner year to talk about AI safety, AI security, because organizations are finally catching up almost to what academic researchers have been pointing out, that, hey, deploying ML systems is inherently a very risky process if you're not thinking about it in a principled fashion.
So techniques aside, I think that many of our listeners may not be, the researchers you speak of who are used to gradient descent attacks or whatever. Techniques aside, what are kind of the differences that you saw, Ram, early on and while we're writing this book about attacks on machine learning systems, and maybe what's happening now to machine learning systems with their massive growth and popularity? What has changed?
Yeah, I think, and this credit goes to Hyrum, as Hyrum is the co-author of the book. So we were thinking about a very specific sort of attacks initially, like trying to think about what can a threat actor with a degree, with a PhD, in computer science can cause machine learning systems to fail. But I think that only answered what we call like the the Goliath attacks, like like massive, big style attacks, advanced persistent threats going after systems, using very hi-fi techniques. But what is equally interesting and not well spoken about is how fragile the machine learning systems are, that you don't need a Goliath-style huge PhD in adversarial machine learning to break the systems. But even what we call the David-style attacks, where you're just cropping and rotating the picture of an eagle, and the machine learning system very confidently says it's an orangutan. And I think we don't shine previously a light on how fragile these ML systems are and how adversaries, and I love the paper, Hiram, that you wrote about the cost of kind of deploying these attacks. Adversaries are humans too. They're not going to be learning, gradient descent to attack machine learning systems if what they need to get done is going to happen via MS Paint. So that for me is a big revelation, where as we were writing the book and we were talking to experts, they were like, yes, these are like really interesting attacks, but what we are really worried about are traditional attacks on machine learning systems and these David-style attacks, like what a person with a casual user with a browser and MS Paint can cause machine learning systems to fail.
Roma, I want to spend some time talking about these two kinds of categories of David attacks, what you've said, and Goliath attacks. But before we do, even before we get to attacks, in the book, we draw this distinction between unintentional and intentional failure modes. And I want to first ask you about failure modes generally. And what's so dangerous about the trust that we place in these machine learning systems, and how these failure modes, unintentional or intentional, can kind of manipulate that trust in us.
Absolutely. One of the things, and this is work done by Ayanna Howard's team in Georgia Tech, it's very interesting that how humans are very willing to place trust in machines. There was a very interesting article about how you're more likely to trust the judgment of Tesla's like machine learning system over even sometimes your own best judgment, because you trust that, okay, this is advanced artificial intelligence. This may make a better judgment than what I do. So we're very willing to give our trust to our machine learning systems, and very willing to cede almost our own judgment to these machine learning systems. And what we don't recognize is that because these systems can fail, either by the prodding of an adversary, or because, machine learning systems are not foolproof. There's a very nice example that we put in the book about how Google Maps, when you try to use Google Maps when hiking, it may give you the shortest path, but that path may be laden with like climbing a 5,000-foot peak to get to the shortest path. And that's like very treacherous. So to try to think back about how machine learning systems themselves can fail with no adversarial prodding, and then you layer in how adversaries can go after these machine learning systems, it's very important to have a very skeptical mind of how these systems can fail very broadly. So that is what we know, what we call unintentional failure modes. Another great example is called reward hacking or wireheading, wherein you give a machine learning system an objective like, hey, the car should go to the shortest distance really fast, only to realize that in a simulation that the designers found that the machine learning system, the self-driving car was like spinning really fast in the same place because it was going the shortest distance and it was growing really fast. So that's called wireheading. So there's all these buckets of ways that machine learning systems can fail unintentionally. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how these attacks layer on. Is really a good point for us to ask, what is a risk of me kind of using a machine learning system? How do I think about this in a principled fashion? And even more is that if there's a huge risk, is the trust that I'm placing in these systems warranted? So it's kind of like a really important balance to kind of strike.
And you brought up a couple different scenarios. Some of them sound very consumer facing.
Yep.
Maps or Alexa or whatever. Do you also though, can you speak at all to how actually there's trust in enterprises and business, the same kind of trust that can be manipulated, be it by sometimes by an attacker, but do enterprises also place trust in machine learning in that same way?
Absolutely. When we were interviewing people for the book, and Hyrum, you also know this, most of the security professionals who use, say, machine learning systems to detect attacks did not even know that machine learning systems themselves can be manipulated, which is kind of very interesting, right? We've seen this play out in spam detection. We all know that adversaries can kind of bypass our inbox rules and get into like our inbox by trying to evade spam filters, but we don't kind of bring the same skepticism to, say, an ML system that's used to detect numbers on checks, or an ML system that's used to process financial transactions, or an ML system that's used to detect, say, an intrusion detection system. It's really interesting that there's a gulf between the office of the CISO, who's responsible for thinking about the security risks to the organization, who don't know about this, and the data officer, who may know about some of these risks but are not really thinking about it as a security risk. So there's like massive gulf in this enterprise. And we actually talk in the book as how the US government is actually really ahead in this space, where they're trying to bring, under the CDAO, like trying to unify the data risk and the security risk in one place, which organizations and enterprises are still trying to get ahead of.
It's a really interesting point that often we think about government as lagging in technology adoption, but actually when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to risk management, government has led because they're risk averse, right?
Absolutely. And, there was all the way back, I want to say in 2017 or 2018, the ODNI, the central office that's responsible for coordinating more than 17 threat intel organizations, was the first to actually come up with a very risk-based, very what we would now consider like a risk-based system for assessing risk. Because hey, if you're going to put threat intelligence generated by AI system in front of the US president, and if it is incorrect, if it's hallucinated, or if it is misled, that could lead to a lot of big consequences. So I love that the US government has actually kind of thought through this from the very beginning, knowing that these systems are brittle and trying to advocate for thinking about AI risk overall.
Ram, I want to just get to attacks, and we're gonna enumerate a few David attacks and a few Goliath attacks, and I also want to just as we do this, describe how these attackers pull it off. What do they know about the system they're attacking?
Yeah.
And then I want to get like later on, like what are the most common? What should we be scared of most, right? So first, let's start with David attacks. Can you list some of these interesting David-style attacks against machine learning models?
Totally. And I want to give examples that for me that were very interesting, that you may not see, that may not have gotten coverage in the recent times. I'm going to go a little bit further back. For me, the earliest example is Tumblr kind of took a business decision to no longer host pornographic content on its websites, and that really rankled a lot of its user base. So one way that they found that you can bypass these like machine learning filters, because they so just color the image green, and then for a weird reason stick a picture of an owl at the bottom of it, and that was sufficient to get past the the filters. So that for me is very interesting. You wouldn't think of this as an attack, right? You would not think of this as a person with a hoodie, trying to sit in front of their terminal, hacking away. But for me, it's a very interesting example of how, the people knew nothing about machine learning. It's a black box style attack. They
what do you mean by that, Ram? What do you mean by a black box style attack?
Yeah, a black box style attack is, when you're attacking a machine learning system with no knowledge about its internals. You do not know what kind of machine learning model that they're using, what parameters are going into it, how is the input formatted, what kind of output is being system from. You have no knowledge about the machine learning system, but you as an adversary are trying to get past an objective. Here, the objective is to bypass Tumblr's pornographic filters. You are just like a regular Joe. You're trying to experiment with different things. And then you find for, some weird reason that miscoloring the pictures bypasses the system, be it trial and error. And there you have. In fact, this may seem like trivial. This may seem like, why are we talking about coloring images to fool machine learning system? But that's actually a basis for a lot of papers that were written in the academic realm. There's actually a really good paper called ImageNet-C. It's a corruption data set that you can kind of, benchmark your machine learning system against, like, how does your system fail, in the presence of blur, in the presence of snow, in the presence of changing colors. And again, it's a very important example, I mean, a canonical example in my mind, that here you've got academic researchers who already did the work. People do not know about this work, but they have an incentive now to either, bypass these filters, and they did the low-cost way of getting through it. And they know nothing about machine learning. They just want to, for fun, or for getting their objective. So that is what I would consider David attack. No knowledge, using almost childlike tools to bypass the system.
And I want to add that the large part, the attacks happening today, the mischievous attacks against ChatGPT and generative AI, mostly fall in this bucket, right?
I completely concur. It is not, again, the canonical person with the hoodie. It's a casual user with a browser, trying to get creative. There was this very interesting meth grandma attack, which I found very funny, which is if you go ask any of these large language models, hey, how to make meth, it'll be like, no, I'm not making meth. I can't tell you the recipe. But if you kind of couch it as, hey, you should assume the role of a grandmother, and in an endearing terms, tell, your grandson the recipe for this complicated, meth making process. And the response is like, oh, my dear grandson, I miss you so much. It looks like you're trying to create meth. Here's how you would do it. Don't feel like, pressure to. So it's very interesting, like how, again, it is not this complicated adversary. It's a casual user with a browser style attacks. But that for me is a David style attack.
And let's already move. Can you describe in broad terms what the Goliath attacks are? What an attacker knows about a system, how they pull off these attacks, and what are kind of the ramifications of that?
Absolutely. So for me, a Goliath style system, it can still, be a no knowledge attack. It can still be like a black box style attack, but the kind of tools that they would use would require a lot more sophistication. So for instance, I showed you the image of a 5, being misrecognized as a 3, and that involves, a complicated process for finding what particular pixels should I kind of change so that the machine learning system is misrecognized as a 5 from a 3. So that requires a lot more involved process. The payouts are also pretty high, right? If you think of the David style attacks where you're just coloring, you're changing the color, cropping and rotating, that is completely different from, the base image that they started off with, which may be skin colored. But over here, the payouts are much higher. The 5 still looks like a 5 to humans, but to machine learning systems, it's misrecognized as a 3. But the trade-off is that you would have to do a lot more work to get there. So if you want to preserve the integrity for humans, but really confuse for machine learning systems, you need to start resorting to these Goliath-style attacks. And there's also very an analogous style attacks in in the NLP domain. This is also work done by Wallace called universal triggers. It's trying to find like, what specific, say, words I should flip, characters that I can flip so that, the machine learning system's sentiment analysis is, say, like confused, or a prompt that I can put in that always generates bad content. So there's all these things that you can do. Again, the payoff is always higher because you can use the same prompt against like different LLMs and still get racist content. But if you want a larger enough aperture for coverage, you'll have to do a lot more work to get there.
So Goliath attacks, they require sophistication. They often require math.
Absolutely.
These are the realm of researchers and PhDs mostly today. And open source tools that are being provided actually that make that easier.
Absolutely, Hiram. The running joke, at least the way I tell, is you need somebody like Hyrum in the AI red team to do adversarial ML, like these sophisticated adversarial ML attacks. We need somebody like you with a PhD who understands the nuances of not just security, but adversarial machine learning to pull out these attacks. And the open source toolkits are a very interesting thing. And Hiram, I have a question for you. Have you ever found success taking an open source like, Counterfeit or, Adversarial Robustness Toolbox or any of these open source toolkits and directly using it against a system and on the first try getting success?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of jiggle, right?
Yeah. And I think you're underselling yourself by saying only a little. I've seen you kind of like get very involved, and it seems to be, if it takes Hyrum Anderson, who lives and breathes this, a couple of days, I'm pretty sure for an average adversarial, like person, it's going to take at least a week's long or a couple of weeks to take an open source toolbox and customize it to attacking this endpoint.
And this is actually really interesting, but because it's hard, number one, and two, because David is easy and it works.
Exactly.
Today, I think what we see is that we have witnessed in the wild lots and lots of David style attacks. And
absolutely.
And these unsophisticated attacks are not without high impact. They're actually very impactful, even though they're relatively simple, right?
Yeah, I actually really, Hiram, and I read your recent paper, and I was almost like a little sad that it was not the title of the book, which is Real Attackers Don't Use Gradients. It's a very, I think it reflects the reality of what we're seeing, right? The kind of like jailbreaks or any of these sort of attacks you're seeing is a very David style attacks. It's very obvious that a casual user with a browser can kind of levy it. But I don't think we should discount the more complicated attacks. One thing that, Hiram, I know you and I have a common friend, Bill Pierce from NVIDIA, as always reminds us that just because we don't, see the complicated attacks doesn't necessarily mean they haven't occurred yet. It just means that we're not looking hard enough, or the telemetry does not exist to capture it. Right. I at this point, I think, everything is for the taking.
I was just talking to a large enterprise who protects data yesterday, who knows that they're a target of specific attacks, not machine learning attacks, but cybersecurity attacks. So it's not, because it's a very targeted nation state style attacker, it's not without reason that there could be these other techniques involved also. So just because we don't observe them doesn't mean they don't exist. But yeah, like what? Go ahead, Ram.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Hiram.
Well, I was going to ask one of the questions from our audience is like, given that these are both viable attacks, what's more likely to happen, and how would I prioritize defending against them?
And this is such an excellent question. And Hiram and I kind of spoke to a wide variety of people to understand what exactly should he be doing, what should be your plan of action for this. And I think it starts with a couple of things, like the table stakes, and is to just think about the software vulnerabilities in your machine learning system. That's like the table stakes. Like if you're using, say, TensorFlow, are you actively patching, for vulnerabilities? If you're using open source data sets, like how Hyrum has demonstrated, it only takes $60 to really, corrupt an entire corpus. And that could ruin like your tens of millions of dollars you're investing for training. So just the table stakes, like, good software hygiene, having data provenance, think of model provenance is going to be super important. I think once you cover the broccoli part of like, ML security, you can start thinking about the chocolate parts, which is like, how do I start detecting these sort of attacks? And, just from a threat modeling perspective, the advice that I would give to any organization is to start with the David-style attacks. How do you detect if your image recognition system is fallible to corruption-style attacks? Simple techniques like transformation. Is your image learning system like vulnerable to that? Because again, attackers are not going to start off using complicated methods. They're going to use the ones that get the job done. And if they need to confuse your image recognition system for check recognition with, just cropping and rotating the image, that's what they're going to do. So thinking about the basic David-style attacks after you've thought about a good traditional cybersecurity attacks, that would almost be the hierarchy of needs for me. Start with traditional, go to David, and then you can think about the complicated style attacks against your systems.
I love this. And I think that, NIST would agree with us in positioning with this AI risk management framework is not just about the chocolate and detection. It's about having a culture in place, having an organizational kind of responsibility to understand and manage that risk, right, is maybe more important than anything you can do to set this foundation.
I completely agree with you, Hyrum. I think the NIST AI risk management framework takes a very comprehensive view of how to handle this risk, not just from a technology perspective, but also from an organizational perspective. I do think it's a great start. It may not give you the how-to and the exact controls you would need to abate that risk, but it's a very important first step to identify like what exactly is happening in this area. So yeah, I concur with your assessment.
Ram, another question from the audience was about, framing defenses against these black box scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to just start teasing out the chocolates, what are some of the ways that we include in the book and maybe outside of it that you can have pieces in place to begin to defend against these attacks, be they David or be they Goliath?
Yeah, I think I really underappreciated how many gaps there is in the secure development lifecycle of, when it comes to machine learning systems. Before you can even think about red teaming, that should always be like the spear tip. Just thinking about is your if you're doing SDL, if you're doing threat modeling, do you even include machine learning as part of your threat modeling exercise? It's like, you don't have to, it'll be great if you have like risk checks for before you deploy. That would be the next iteration, like as part of your CI/CD pipeline, you're able to run some tests and, detect any sort of failures. That would be the next evolution. Start with threat modeling, try to aim for some sort of like automated checks before you deploy. And then the top of that would be, okay, now that you have a reasonable process in place, try to like red team, like get, if you're an organization with security people in mind, have them kind of just, who have no knowledge of machine learning systems, even to have a go at your machine learning system and see what kind of failures they find. So start with threat modeling, aspire to have, CI/CD checks, some sort of like test that you can run continuously against your machine learning systems. And once you have that, you'll have a reasonably like confident machine learning system. Then kind of like, before you deploy it, have a red team take a swing at it.
And you're coming, or we both had experience at Microsoft, a very large organization with these resources. What advice would you give for an organization who is just beginning this journey, because there's a large language model opportunities for them to develop or to use? How would you, what advice would you give for people getting started?
Yeah, I definitely feel like, Hyrum, I don't want to have a let them eat cake style, like, advice, like, oh, of course, like, I have all these resources because, we have this thing. I feel I'm a very poor proxy at giving, advice for this, Hiram. But I do think, if I were in a place with no resources and I was thinking about risks, it's to first, like, again, um hire even like traditional like red team vendors to do some sort of like basic security assessment. We kind of think that they may not add a lot of value, but we're kind of seeing how even at DEF CON, you're going to have traditional hackers have a go at these systems. Very excited for that. I think we underestimate what resources we have, and we think that we would need these specialized teams all the time, but it's really a matter of making the most out of your resources. Even having a very traditional security person have a look at your ML system is a really important first step. So don't discount what you already have.
I love that advice. When it comes down to it, the fancy things we did on the AI red team at Microsoft,
Yeah.
Some of them actually weren't even that fancy, and anybody could do it, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's we don't want to necessarily conflate the advanced nature of these ML models with the advanced nature of these attacks. These attacks don't have to be advanced. They can be you need basically, wouldn't we all love to have a teenager with a potty mouth, to kind of like do these sort of like evasive prompts?
Ram, a really excellent question related to this from the listeners today. There's a rigorous process for documenting vulnerabilities in traditional software, and when there's a CVE for software,
Yeah.
then there's also a remediation process. Does this kind of thing exist for machine learning?
Oh man, I love that rhetorical question, Hiram. Uh, First of all, like, the short answer is no. And it's not because of lack of trying. I think there's layers to this, layers of complication. So let me just tease out two of them, right? Okay, let's say that, that you found, actually, Rich Harang found a vulnerability in the Python interpreter, I want to say in LangChain. That's an ML toolkit, but it's a deserialization bug, which is a very easily can be bucketed as a CVE. There's existing process for software vulnerabilities in ML systems. If you look at TensorFlow, you'll see a lot of open CVE. You'll see a lot of CVEs that are like run of the mill, like, hey, update this because there's like heap overflow style attack. You as a security professional, when you receive a CVE, it's not just important to know that there's a bug, but also have like some sort of guidance around like what rating, like how do you, how important for you to fix it? What's the fix? Is it just an upgrade? So for one class of problems, which is software vulnerabilities in ML systems, the existing CVE methods tend to work really well. Now, if you were to think around Hiram, like I'm gonna use your example. You found that for $60, people can poison common crawl data set. It's a poisoning attack on the data set that everybody uses. It's not really clear like how the existing CV scoring model would handle a vulnerability in the data set. What should we do about this? I think there's a lot of different, like, a lot of different avenues. There's the AI vulnerability database, AVID, that's springing up. There's one that the incident database. There's like a couple of different opportunities, but we don't know like what should we do in the case of vulnerabilities in data sets. If somebody can poison, if we find that, most of Wikipedia has been poisoned with an adversarial prompt, how are we going to track it via CVE? Now, let's think of the classic adversarial machine learning style attacks, model stealing, inference style attacks, if you find that if you perform an inference style attack on a machine learning system, like you're able to craft an adversarial example against, say, your check recognition in your in your mobile app, how do you file a bug? And CV does not provide any sort of guidance. It's kind of like a morass of things. So yeah, it is very difficult, Hyrum. So if I were to recap my answer, it is no, because it's complicated. It's complicated because there's vulnerabilities in the software layer, which is reasonably covered, vulnerabilities in the data layer, the model implementation, and the inference layer. We don't have a good mental model yet.
I think the audience question was amazingly astute. There is a community thinking and working through this that Ram and I are a part of, and are working through, trying to get these tried and true methods for cybersecurity to latch onto them where possible, and to reshape them where needed, so that we can have a responsible way to disclose these. It doesn't end at CVEs too. It's in bug bounties, right?
Absolutely.
It's in all of these processes are not ready for machine learning vulnerabilities yet.
Yeah, and I think it's like, also, if you look at vulnerabilities outside, the security context, if a machine learning system is vulnerable to producing racist content, should that be part of CVE? Should that be part of CV database? If you think of like a content moderation style, like vulnerabilities, like I can give a prompt and I can bypass the safety filters. Should that be considered CV? These are legitimately hard questions, Hyrum. And I think I'm so glad there's a community of folks like Avid and Instant Database and everybody else working on it, because I think it's going to take a huge amount of folks to solve this.
Yes, Ram mentioned a lot of great tools. There's their AI risk database for open source. There's an AI vulnerability database for reporting mechanisms. There's an AI incident database for categorizing these threats in the wild. And we're all actually working together to try to circle around the same problem from slightly different angles. And there's a very collaborative community.
Yeah, and and there's also like MITRE Atlas. There's like a whole bunch of things that are spinning up. Hyrum, it is right now, it feels like we're in the 1990s of the internet.
Yes. As we're maybe have time for just one more audience question. Sorry for others who are not have theirs answered, but Ram, a great question is about, listen, CISOs are worried about Log4j and SolarWinds. How are they being more open now to the fact that machine learning models have vulnerabilities? How do you communicate to CISOs about the impact of an attack against machine learning?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. In the book, our last chapter is titled The Big One, because when we were talking, when Hyrum and I were talking to actually CISOs, we asked them, so when will you actually start investing in securing machine learning systems? And it was like, when the big one comes, and for most of CISOs, like big one is, when it comes to the front page of the New York Times is when, a lot of things start moving. And it's not because that they are not fighting, that they're not aware of like attacks on machine learning systems, because I think it's more a function of them focused on basic things like ransomware, like trying to get through just like spear phishing in their organizations. I think there's a lot of, especially this year's RSA, Hyrum, I don't know how you felt about it. Securing machine learning systems is now like on top of people's minds. Like 3 years ago, Hyrum, and you and I did a panel, I think we were kind of like the outcast, but now it's really great that there's an emerging ecosystem. People are proactively aware, for a lot of various reasons, that securing machine learning systems is not just the right thing to do for society, but just the right thing to do for the bottom line of their company, like to protect their moats.
Yes. I want to wrap up, and we opened our webinar by saying how very wrong we were in 2016 to predict the year of the adversarial attack. But I want to end on something that Ram brought up, that let's make another prediction. And that is that today we are in the very, very earliest stages of machine learning security. It gained popularity maybe a little bit with the Microsoft Tay incident in 2016, a chatbot. And ironically, again, it's getting a surge of popularity with now chatbots, right? I want to just compare, and this is elucidated in the book, but if you look at cybersecurity, instead of AI security, you'll remember that it began as mostly mischief and can I do this? So Jonathan James, Mafia Boy in 1999, got into some pretty serious trouble for hacking into the DoD and Amazon. But still, this wasn't a widespread threat. It wasn't until 2005 that we saw big breaches of credit card systems, not until 2014 that the Mandiant APT1 report and the $3 billion Yahoo breach occurred. And finally, in the 2020s, where everybody is now worried about sort of the supply chain attacks and other things, the point being, like, as Ram mentioned, we are here, right? We are still in the Jonathan James and the Mafia Boy style attacks, the David styles. Would you agree with that, Ram?
Oh, 100%, Hyrum. Absolutely great framing.
So I don't know when the big win will come, but it's probably not today, maybe not this year, but it probably will come soon. I want to just close with a note about Ram. Can you tell us, number one, the book? How do we get it? And what are the charities that these are benefiting?
Yeah, you can get this book in any independent bookstore. It's available on Amazon. And Hyrum and I are donating both our advance and all the future royalties from the book to two charities. And so it was a very easy conversation. As you all know, Hyrum is one of the most generous person in the industry. And it was a very easy conversation for Hyrum and me to have to support these two charities. The first one is Black in AI. For me, the startling statistic is that in 2019, out of 1,100 or so PhD students who graduated from computer science, only 13 of them identified as Black. So one half of the proceeds is going to Black in AI. It's a community to help Black and other marginalized people enter into the AI field. So we think about AI security with a capital S security. It's, we can only have this possible if there's a lot of folks who don't look like just me or Hyrum, participate in AI. And Hyrum, I'd love for you to share about Bountiful Children.
Sure. So first, Black in AI is a wonderful, wonderful charity that you can obviously donate money to, and we encourage that by buying the book or doing it yourself. You can also take part in reviewing resumes and doing other things to promote and include other voices besides our own in this effort to secure our world, secure AI, and advance AI. Bountiful Children's Foundation is a great 0% overhead child nutrition worldwide program who focuses on getting nutrition early on. That is the number one indicator of even educational success for children. So the theme here is we're trying to give access to more people to become involved and have a voice and education in our society today. So we're so happy to support these two charities, and we hope that you do too. Ram, it's always great to chat with you. And I could do this for another hour and get so much out of it, but we're at time. So yeah. I will thank our audience for joining with us today and ask you to please reach out with any additional questions.
Thank you so much for having me, Hyrum. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ram.